If someone is able to show me what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. It is the person who continues in his self-deception and ignorance who is harmed. I do my duty, other things trouble me not, for they are either things without life, or things without reason, or things that have rambled and know not the way. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Part 1. What is a mercenary? Most people have a pretty basic understanding of what it means to be a mercenary, even if it's limited to historical accounts or fictional representations in media. Hopefully most of you listening can remember your ancient civilization course where your teacher told the tale of Carthage's reliance upon paying outsiders to defend their growing merchant empire. If that teacher was skilled, he or she also highlighted the folly of their attempt to stiff their mercenaries following the First Punic War. The cost of hiring new mercenaries to defend yourself from the old ones you tried to cheat should be a lesson well learned for any tin pot despot. Always pay your mercenaries their full contracted wages, plus 15%. But perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves. To paraphrase the late Douglas Adams, space is big, really big. Space is so mind-bogglingly big that our feeble mammalian brains can hardly comprehend even the shortest of distances beyond Earth. For example, if you were to drive at highway speed at 65 miles per hour, it would take you roughly 166 days to cross the average distance from Earth to its nearest neighbor, the Moon. Travel to Mars at its closest point is roughly 33.9 million miles, and that would take approximately 21,731 days, or 59.54 years at constant travel. I'll quit whacking on this dead horse, but I think my point is supported. Space is really big, and human lifespans are comparatively nothing. Across the inner sphere, of course, those distances are mitigated through the use of faster-than-light travel with jump ships, but even that technology is limited, both in availability, the distance from jump points to settled planets, and the number of jump ships that exist in a specific time and place. The delays inherent in interstellar travel within the BattleTech Universe created opportunities for most of the events in the timeline. While the corporate authoritarian bureaucracies of the great houses make the regimes of the 20th and 21st century look like a child's lemonade stand, they are still limited by time and distance. For the intrepid and entrepreneurial-minded, this was an opportunity to potentially make a lot of money. Individuals and units that offered up their expertise in force application created a useful tool for local, regional, and house powers who were often stretched beyond the limits of their logistics. Paying mercenaries to do dirty or mundane work was often the financially responsible course of action. It was a path that many took, and a practice common from before and even during the formation of the Star League in 2571. Mercenary units became helpful in a variety of functions, from garrison duty to clandestine operations deep in enemy territory, and of course everything in between. In the early days of the battle mech, they were too rare for any mercenary unit to procure. However, over time they did show up in merc units through leasing and when the need and opportunity arose. To put it bluntly, mechs are incredibly expensive, not only to obtain but to keep running through multiple battles. None but the largest and well-funded mercenary units could hope to field them. This was the state of things throughout the Star League years. The well-established order was upset by the Amaris coup, which flipped the pieces on the inner sphere table and caused chaos across settled space. With Kerensky's SLDF battling Amaris' forces, everyone else was largely on their own to either settle grievances or find a way to defend themselves. Mercenary units made a killing taking contracts to defend worlds. Others made even more by doing the dirty work for every tin pot wannabe regional warlord and even Stefan Amaris himself. In an often overlooked aspect of the blood-soaked years preceding the ultimate collapse of Amaris under the SLDF boot was the role of the many mercenary units which ignored traditional limitations on the use of force, slaughtering civilians, targeting urban areas, and sullying the term mercenary for generations. With Kerensky's final attempts to preserve the Star League failing and the inner sphere collapsing into the First Succession War, the good times for hired guns continued. It was still a tremendously dangerous job, of course, especially with great houses freely using weapons of mass destruction to cause as much damage as possible. However, the savvy and lucky mercenary units had no shortage of opportunity to make coin. The quality of decision is like the well-timed swoop of a falcon, which enables it to strike and destroy its victim. Sun Tzu, Art of War, 513. The establishment of larger units like the Eridani Light Horse, which was bolstered by former SLDF soldiers, gradually improved the reputation of mercenaries in general. Many of these more successful units began to also set the norms and rules for mercenary conduct, which differentiated them from the dregs and pirates who only thinly veiled themselves as mercenaries. When Comstar stepped into the fray and established the Mercenary Review Board, potential employers finally had a way to at least mitigate some of the risk of signing on a mercenary unit. Mercs that abandoned contracts, fled battle, or even plundered the planets they were hired to defend were quickly blacklisted. It wasn't a perfect system, and politics could definitely come into play over interpretations of mercenary behavior. However, over time, the entire mercenary profession gained respectability, and this benefited both the employers and the honest mercenaries. By the Fourth Succession War, many residents of the Inner Sphere could rattle off names like the Grey Death Legion, Hansen's Rough Riders, and Northwind Highlanders because their exploits were advertised in holovids and news reports. Their mercenary units took on an almost absurd level of popularity and mythology, especially since they tended to avoid having to be held responsible for sticking around and having to rebuild once the shooting stopped. They could play the role of avenging angel or liberator well for the cameras. As the fires of the Fourth Succession War cooled, many former House Mechwarriors sought fame and fortune in mercenary units, either joining up with established entities or forming their own startups. Their numbers were bolstered by young new graduates from military academies who saw their opportunities for a career with a house unit drying up, or they just sought adventures across the stars. Many warriors begged, borrowed, or stole passage on jump ships in hope of reaching the hiring halls of Galatea and outreach in hope of achieving fame and reaping fortune. When looking at this time period, before and after the War of 3039, it's difficult for me not to picture the intrepid, if deluded, people marching up ice and snow-covered hills toward the Yukon in the late 1890s. With heads full of stories of gold nuggets the size of your fist picked up off the ground, these people risked it all. Of course, almost no one who made the journey struck it rich, but it was still an adventure. Part 2. Becoming a Mercenary. The way someone might adopt the life of a mercenary vary wildly depending upon the person's individual circumstance and opportunities. For someone with existing military experience with a house unit or planetary defense force, it could be as easy as making contact with a merc unit currently stationed on a world. For those without experience, there were logistics positions which one could hopefully work their way up to fame and glory. Like in so many other elements of life, being in the right place at the right time and being able to take advantage of an opportunity when it arises showed the path forward. Additionally, where you are in the Inner Sphere also could have a tremendous impact both on your opinion of mercenaries and the likelihood that you see it as a viable career option. For example, the Lyran Commonwealth generally held mercenary units in good favor, and even those from wealthier families who became mercenaries were not looked down on. This was significantly different from how mercenaries were traditionally viewed by the Draconis Combine. On Cretan planets, mercenaries were often viewed very negatively and even actively sabotaged by planetary and regional bureaucrats who saw them as likely traitors and subversive elements. Following the debacle with the Wolf's Dragoons Combine contract, it became state policy to actively hunt down mercenary units and purge the Dragon's domain. Though the rigor that is shown in enforcing this policy has ebbed and flowed over the years, it's a safe bet that most Combine worlds are not going to be friendly towards mercenary visitors. Occupying various locations in the middle ground of fans versus villains were the Free Worlds League, House Davion, Free Rasselhog Republic, and the Capellan Confederation. The Capellans stood closer to the realm of distrust and contempt after the Northwind Highlanders returned to Northwind, breaking long-standing ties with the state and building rapport with the Davians. Still, an intrepid mercenary unit could take advantage of contracts with the Capellan state. Just make sure you read the fine print before you sign anything. For the prospective mercenary seeking out their first job with an existing entity, a planetary hiring hall or the surrounding restaurants and bars might be the best place to scope out opportunities. For those who are able to book jump ship travel to Outreach, Galatea, Herodotus, or Solaris 7, they would have more options, as those are some of the biggest hubs of mercenary work. Galatea specifically is known as the Mercenary Star due to the volume of traffic from house, regional, and even planetary entities seeking to hire. The planet is just 3 jumps from Terra, so it's a fair hub for employers who travel from across the inner sphere. It's interesting to note that even though these planetary hubs for mercenaries were often found within the realms of a great house, representatives from most of the other factions were free to come and go. This was seen as mutually beneficial, as spy networks could keep tabs on which mercenary units were being courted by house representatives and possibly expose tactical moves ahead of time. I say, therefore, that the arms with which a prince defends his state are either his own, or they are mercenaries, auxiliaries, or mixed. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are useless and dangerous, and if one holds his state based on these arms, he will stand neither firm nor safe, for they are disunited, ambitious, and without discipline, unfaithful, valiant before friends, cowardly before enemies. They have neither the fear of God nor fidelity to men, and destruction is deferred only so long as the attack is, for in peace one is robbed by them, and in war by the enemy. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince, Chapter 12. Part 3. Securing a Contract. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to need to discuss contracts at the unit level. Individual contracts with a specific technician or mechwarrior could look like any number of employment contracts going back millennia. Generally, there would be an agreed-upon term of employment in exchange for either a set wage, living expenses, or a percentage of future contract earnings, or a combination of all 3 plus other bonus and caveats. How well you do depends on many factors, including but not limited to your experience, skill set, whether you own your own mech, and the ability to negotiate with a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. For leaders of mercenary units, the challenges of negotiating a contract are compounded by the costs of maintenance, supplies, ammunition, and dozens of other things which can quickly drain coffers if one isn't wary. Many of these costs can be factored into contracts with an employer, especially if the employer can save some coin by letting the mercs use repair facilities or draw upon pre-existing stocks of parts and ammunition. Ultimately, the sky's the limit concerning what specifics could be included in a contract, so long as the Mercenary Review Board oversight doesn't get fussy about the specifics. In exchange for payment and perks, employers generally hold mercenaries to a pretty high standard. Specific language within contracts is stridently followed, be it a simple garrison contract or assigning a mercenary unit to aid a major invasion. Mercenary units that don't live up to the terms of the contract can expect both formal and informal sanction. That goes both ways, as employers who make a habit out of shortchanging units or quibbling over minor issues to avoid having to pay out on a contract can earn a nasty reputation when word of mouth spreads across employment hubs. A mercenary command may breach a contract by taking improper action against non-military targets, failing to perform contracted duties to the best of its ability in accordance with the area's conventions or outreach accords, displaying cowardice in the face of the enemy, willfully disobeying its legally sanctioned commanders, or willfully disregarding contractual obligations, or misrepresenting its qualifications or assets. An employer may breach a contract by misrepresenting the mission parameters in a contract, or through omission of fact or misrepresentation, luring a mercenary command into situations where its survival forces it to commit acts that violate the area's conventions or outreach accords. Another frequent pitfall for merc units who incorporate quality of life elements into contracts is the classic company store scam, where an employer will overcharge for goods and services, yet offer credit against the unit's contract. Without other options and risking breaking their side of the deal, merc units can sometimes end up leaving a successful job with little or nothing to show for it after paying back the debt. Something to keep in mind for the aspiring mercenary unit commander is that for every Grey Death Legion, Fushida's Fusiliers, and Mechwarrion's armored cavalry, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of mercenary units that either go bankrupt or are wiped out. Because ultimately, we're still talking about war, and usually there's one side that wins and one side that loses. Should a mercenary unit be on that losing side even just once, that can doom the entire venture. Toward that end, I declare that the Allied Mercenary Command shall make its services available to any and all local parties who require them in the name of maintaining freedom and stability in these uncertain times. Special contracting services for AMC forces may be accessed at the hiring hall by the end of this week, and units will be approved and deployed based upon needs of the strategic situation for the duration of the perceived emergency. Let it be known, however, that this is not a declaration of war. Neither we Dragoons nor the other AMC member units will act to seize and hold territory. All operations we undertake will consist of defensive actions, and only on behalf of those neighbors who contract for our services. We act in defense for our neighbors and our own sovereignty in the face of uncertainty. Commander Jamie Wolfe, announcing the formation of the Allied Mercenary Command, March 3066. Part 4. Mercenary Unit Profiles. Rather than cover the big names like Kellhounds, Northwind Highlanders, and Wolf's Dragoons, I want to highlight some smaller merc units that have made their mark on the timeline. The first of the bunch is one of my personal favorites. The Killer Bees were a mercenary unit founded in 3025 in the last year of the Third Succession War. Test pilots working for Cal Boeing, which was an aerospace company based near the outer edge of Davion space, decided that they wanted more from life. Striking out on their own, the pilots found work flying light recon along the Davion-Capellan border. Now, with a taste for action, they officially became a mercenary unit and accepted a contract with the Lyran Commonwealth on the border of the Draconis Combine. After completing that service successfully, the unit expanded and took on additional personnel, both in VTOL forces and conventional battle mechs. Word of the Killer Bees' skill spread, and when the Magistracy of Canopus offered a lucrative contract to aid in their conflict with the Capellans, the Bees accepted. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a rough job that threatened the mercenary unit's survival. During a Capellan counterattack aided by elements from Mechwarrion's armored cavalry, another mercenary unit, the Bees were ordered to throw themselves into the fray in order to blunt the advance. Seeing the order as a death sentence and a futile, wasteful act, the Killer Bees' commanding officer in the field, Major Ernst Murdoch, refused it and instead pulled his forces from the sector. The Magistracy representatives were quick to complain about the breach in contract, but the mercenaries were quick to respond, widely advertising the fact that Canopian officers were attempting to use the Killer Bees as bullet shields. In the following years, the Killer Bees distinguished themselves and grew to be a formidable force. Their mixed force battalion included a company of light and medium mechs, an aerospace squadron of light fighters, a VTOL company, and a company of laser rifle infantry devoted to protecting the unit's assets. Additionally, the Killer Bees owned their own dropships and a jump ship. The jump ship was borrowed from the Draconis Combine during the Bees' service with the Lyrans during the War of 3039. Initially, the ship ended up being too much for the mercenaries, who nearly bankrupted themselves trying to keep it up and running. However, once initial costs for repairs and maintenance were handled, being in control of their own travel across the stars was a major boon for the Killer Bees. When Comstar and the Combine decided they needed to find the clan homeworlds to carry out Operation Bulldog, the Killer Bees were hired to take advantage of their experience working in the periphery as expert scouts. The Bees worked in tangent with the Explorer Corps until 3060, following the destruction of Clan Smoke Jaguar and Huntress. One might be able to guess the parade paint scheme for the Killer Bees, which heavily features the use of yellow and black paint, but the Merc unit is actually known for being exceptional at visual obfuscation and camouflage with their gear. It's nice when a group knows when to be sneaky and when to pour out the razzle-dazzle. Next up, I want to highlight Derek's Devils, a mercenary unit consisting largely of heavy and assault battlemechs that formed in 3045. As is often the case, mercenary units suffer trials and tribulations before people split and find their own way. This was the case for Derek's Devils, who split off from another merc unit named Hudson's Red Devils. Based in and around the periphery near the Capellan Confederation, Derek's Devils found work with the Magistracy of Canopus and specifically found a home on Dunyanshire where their efforts to eradicate pirates endeared themselves with the locals. In one particularly nasty incident, raiders kidnapped a group of residents, intending to sell them as slaves elsewhere, and the Devils showed up just in time to save them. The leader of the pirates was killed by Derek Hudson, the leader of the Devils, in a mad dash which not only stopped the escape, but also disabled the pirate dropship, preventing it from lifting off and costing the pirates valuable equipment. The Devils consist of mixed forces, including 2 companies of mechs, one of which is primarily heavy and assault mechs, while the second has a more mixed weight set, due to the fact that most of them were savaged from battlefields. Major Derek Hudson is the proud owner of an awesome 8Q, which he often uses to charge into battles, seeking out close range and melee fights. This preference has nearly gotten him killed on multiple occasions. When Major Elias Clifton decided to build a new mercenary unit in 2990, he deliberately sought out members from a variety of backgrounds and personal histories. He believed that a mercenary unit that had at least some working experience, either for or against all the possible adversaries and allies in the Inner Sphere, would be an asset. As a result, Clifton's Rangers were a motley ragtag bunch of former House military. As it turned out, having a few former DCMS Mechwarriors on the payroll paid off for the Rangers, as an incident with an accepted contract with the Draconis Combine threatened to get everyone thrown into prison or worse. The specifics of that incident I wasn't able to determine, but the Rangers were only able to flee the Combine space after returning in advance on their contracted payment. Later service for the Free Worlds League went well, and Clifton's Rangers built their reputation and experience as a cohesive unit. On Berenson in 2995, Rangers with experience of the Capellan Order of War ended up helping earn a major victory over a Liao unit called Vincent's Commandos. Surviving the 3rd and 4th Succession Wars, Clifton's Rangers were able to grow and establish a solid reputation during operations against the forces of St. Ives. Unfortunately for the Rangers, accepting a contract with the Word of Blake in 3065 tanked their Dragoons' rating and left the unit with a smeared reputation. The ultimate fate of Clifton's Rangers isn't known past 3067, when the unit was involved in the Blakist attempt to keep control of the planet Marcus, specifically the uranium mines on its surface. The Rangers fought along with other Blakist mercenaries against the Comguard, and they were partially successful even though the mines were rendered completely unusable in the process. When word reached Marcus that the Blakists on Terra had been defeated, many of the mercenary units which had been taking money from the Word of Blake fled for their lives. Presumably this included Clifton's Rangers, as this was the last time they show up in the available records. Any mercenaries who stayed behind on Marcus risked prison or execution at the hands of locals, who were incredibly hostile toward the Blakists who were blamed for the entire occupation. No amount of money could ever excuse the atrocities you and your employers have inflicted upon these people. By the celestial wisdom, I swear you will hang for what you have done. As the Inner Sphere moves deeper into the Ilkland era, there are few sure things. Borders will likely continue to shift as the clans settle in and alliances both form and break. One of those precious and valuable sure things is that mercenaries will continue to play an integral role in modern conflict. While the technology and tactics will shift over the years, the need for professional soldiers seems to be eternal. And if you can't produce your own, you're going to have to rent them. Just make sure you pay them on time, plus 15%. Do you have a favorite mercenary unit? Tell me who and why down in the comments below, and we'll keep the conversation going. Thanks as always for coming by as we talked BattleTech. If you enjoyed the video and feel it was worthy, don't forget the thumbs up button, and even hitting subscribe will make it much more likely you'll see my nonsense in the future. For those of you who have taken that extra step of becoming channel members and supported on Ko-fi, thank you. Without you, none of this would be possible. Until we meet again, please take care of yourself and your loved ones by making the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.